Hey friends, welcome back to the Adventures of Blink. I am of course Blink and you can find me on GitHub right here. Now last week we started learning how to use Git. We were able to initialize a repository, we did some committing, we did some reverting and resetting in case we made mistakes. We know how to get them back out of the Git repo. We were able to build a git ignore file and see how that worked. We got a lot of the basics out of the way. But what we really didn't talk about yet is what to do in a way that we experiment in our code base. You see, it's one thing to have like an idea of where I'm going to go with this. So I'm going to build this thing and I know I have to do A, B, and C. And so I write some code for part A and I put it out there. And then I write some code for part B and I put it out there. And it's sort of this linear progression. I know all the steps. There's no surprises. I'm just trying to get it done. But what happens if my code base is going to be experimental in some way? What if I'm going to try a thing and I don't know if it's going to work? And I don't want to start doing it in a linear fashion. Because if I do that, like imagine I'm going to build this new feature and I start out there and I commit, and I get a bunch of commits down the road and suddenly I realize this is not going to work at all for me. I need to undo all of that mess that I've done. Well, yeah, I can totally recover from that by cherry picking out which commits I need to remove and all that. But that sounds tedious and it's going to take a long time. It would be better if I had started from the idea of making a copy of my code base someplace. And once I had this copy, leave my leave my working version behind. And I'm going to start working in this fresh copy and make the changes and do the experiment there. That way, if something goes wrong with it, I can just dispose of the copy and then I still have my original ready to roll. Up to now, all we've talked about in terms of Git is that linear progression though. So really what we need to discover is something called a branch. And that's what we're going to talk about today. See, in Git, we have the ability to create those copies, we call them branches, and commit to them separately, and then merge them back together at a later point when we reach a time when we're satisfied with their behavior. So let's see if we can try that today, shall we? So here we are in the same repository that we worked in last week. I cleaned up a little bit of stuff. You'll see like the credentials.txt is missing. I just didn't want a bunch of extra stuff that wasn't related to this topic in here. So I cleared it all out and got it back to a fresh state where we have the git ignore file, but that's really about it. So we're going to see what we can do to create branches. The first thing we need to do is understand what our branch structure looks like right now. And so we're going to do that with git branch. Okay, now this responds with a list of all the branches. In this case, we only have one called main. And you'll find that the work you do in Git will always create a main branch. When you create a new repository, main is the first branch that gets created. It's the default. Okay, you'll also see a little asterisk next to main there that tells us we're currently checked out on main. So think of checking out the same way you would do like a library book. We check it out, we take it off the shelf, it goes with us till we're finished with it, and then we check it back in and we check out a different branch, right? And so that's how branching works. Let's see if we can get a look at this. Let's imagine that we're going to build a new feature, like pretend that this repository is full of code. I have a fully working application here, and I have bought into the 2024 hype of generative AI, and I'm going to build an AI integration into my app. How would I go about doing this? Well, like I mentioned earlier, I could just start writing directly in main and keep committing to it and keep going. But what happens if that breaks? Now I have to untangle the mess that I've made in a whole series of commits, and it's going to be painful to keep up with all that. It would be better if I made a copy first and work from the copy. So we're going to check out a new branch. And the way you do that is git checkout, okay? And you add a -b. -b says create this branch brand new if it doesn't already exist. And then I'm going to give it a name. So I'm going to say AI integration. Okay, I've now created the AI integration branch and I am now checked out on that branch. I can tell this because I can look right down here and I can see AI integration. So VS Code gives me a neat way to see that down here. I could also do git status and it will tell me that I am on branch AI integration right now. And so now I've started my branch. I can start writing code. I can come in here and say AI file. Okay. And of course, I'm just pretending to write code right now because you don't want to wait on me to have to actually code the app to show you this stuff. We're more interested in how Git functions today than we are in being able to actually write a program with an AI integration. But I come in here and I say, this is my new feature. So let's imagine I worked on that for a while and I got it working. Okay. So now I have this here. But what happened to main? How do I know that things aren't there yet? So what I need to do first is I'll do git add AI file, and I'll do git commit and AI integration. Okay, so now I've added that to my repository. But what happens if I go back to main? So if I do a checkout of main, switches me to branch main, but look over here, my AI file went away because it's not in this branch yet. And you can actually see, like, the editor, because I still had the file open, it says this file isn't here right now. Okay, Git manages that for you so that you now have a completely separate copy. So I've started working on my AI integration in the other branch, but it hasn't affected my main. If somebody else needs me to come in and do like an urgent bug fix on main, I still have the ability to do that without interfering with anything that's happening in AI, and I can release what's in main back out to them immediately with the bug fix, rather than being like, well, hey, I actually started to do AI integration on this, so you need to wait till that's done so I can put it all together in a neatly packaged unit. That wouldn't be good customer service. So this gives me the ability to start separating those problems out from each other, which lets me manage my schedule much more easily. So now I have main, which has the pre-existing working app, and then I have AI integration, which now has the beginnings of my new feature on it. Now let's imagine that I've actually finished the AI feature and I'm ready to merge that sucker back in. I'm ready to make this part of the product for good. What I'm going to do, since I'm already checked out on main, I don't have to switch back there. But that would be the idea. You go to the branch where you want the code to end up. So I'm in the destination, which is main, and I'm going to do git merge AI integration. Okay. Now, this could have a couple outcomes. One is that it's going to do what's called a fast forward. It's going to realize that it can just pull everything in and it's all good and we just keep on moving. That would be the easiest way. It might also find, for instance, if I had done a bug fix in main and had that in flight at the same time as the AI integration, it might do something called a merge conflict. Well, we're going to do the happy path first with this so you can see what that looks like. So git merge AI integration, and you can see I get a note that says it's fast forwarding and it's bringing over the AI file.txt. It made one change with one insertion, and I can see now I'm on main, but I have the AI file in main now. So I've now merged this in together. Now, the other thing that I can do is clean up after myself, because if I look, I still have the AI integration branch. It doesn't delete it by default when you merge it in. It keeps it out there in case you need to refer to it later. But let's say, hey, the merge was successful. I'm good with it. I don't need to keep the clutter out here anymore. It's important to me to keep my workspace clear so that I don't get confused later on. If I have 15 branches out here to have to sift through, I might pick the wrong one, or I might forget where I had the files, and it just creates overhead headaches that I have to sort through. So I'm going to delete the branch, and I'm going to do git branch-d, capital D there, and I'm going to do AI integration. Oh, only if I spell it right. And you'll see I get a note back that says deleted branch AI integration. And it tells me what the commit ID was for that branch, which is super cool. I now have all this done. And if I go back to git branch, I now have a nice clean project again. Now, one thing I sort of glossed over there is you can't delete a branch while it's the one that's checked out. So the only way I was able to run this delete up here wherever it was. Gosh, I can't see the text anymore. Oh, it's down here. The only reason I was able to run this delete is because I was already on main when I did it. If I were still checked out on AI integration, it would tell me that it can't delete the active branch. So it's important to know that you have to go someplace else in order to delete a branch, so that you're not in, like, you don't have it checked out at the time you're trying to get rid of it. This is also important because of the word main. It's important to know that even though Git will allow you to delete main, you probably shouldn't. And it's not necessarily anything that's going to break your Git, but it could break the GitHub or the GitLab editions of your code if you have it pushed up there, because they're expecting that default branch to exist. And if it doesn't, it can create headaches for you later. So better to just sort of treat main as a special thing that you wouldn't delete, even though theoretically it is possible. And under certain circumstances, of course, you can totally do that. If that's the only way to fix your problem, go for it. But by the time you get to a problem that complicated, you've probably mastered Git to the point that you don't need me to explain it to you anymore. So kudos to you. Anyway, we've now merged in our change. We have this new thing built into our code, and it's all working great. So something else you should also be aware of is that it matters where you are when you create a branch. Because if I create a branch from main, then main becomes the source from which the branch gets created. But if I'm on a different branch, like if I were on the working version of AI integrations before I'd done the merge, then if I create a new branch while I'm on AI integration, it's actually going to use AI integration as the base for that branch, and that could cause unintended consequences as well. So be aware of where you are. That's why your editor tool will always try to give you some sort of feedback. Different editors show it in different ways. In VS Code, it just happens to be down here in the bottom left. But make sure you know what branch you're on before you start creating branches, lest you happen to pick the wrong one for what you're trying to achieve. Now, we've created this new branch, and it's worked out fine, and we merged it back in, and everything's working well. What happens in the not happy path? So I mentioned earlier that it could go one of two ways. Either it's going to do the fast forward merge and everything's good, or it's going to cause a problem. How am I going to address the problem? Well, let's take a look and see if we can see an example of that. So I'm on main, and I'm going to do git checkout branch, or new branch, and I'm going to do a B1. And then I'm going to go back to main, and then I'm going to do git checkout -b b2. So I've now made two different branches that live in my code base. And then of course there's main that exists already. So the first thing I'm going to do is go back into B1, and we're going to make an update. So let's say in the AI file, and I need to make this a little bit bigger so you can see me typing in there. And I would say B1's change to AI file. Okay, so I've made that change there. And then I'm going to do a git commit. And I'm using the -a here to say grab everything that's ready to be committed, just as a shortcut. B1 change is my message there. Okay, so I've now done that in B1. Now I'm going to do git checkout B2. Okay, and you can see when I move back to B2, it doesn't have the B1 entry anymore. So now I'm going to come in here and I'm going to do this is the B2 change. All right, and then I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to do a commit B2 change. Okay, so now I've created two different branches, and I've made updates in both of them, and I want to push them both back into main. What am I going to do to make this work? Well, when I go to checkout main, I can do git merge B1. right? That makes sense. I'm going to pull in the first one, and that's going to make it work. And you know what? It goes. It's all good. And so now on main, I now have B1's change in the file. The problem only comes about when I'm the second guy in the equation. If I come in here and try to do git merge B2, so I'm still on main, I'm going to go grab the B2 branch and pull it into main. Well, B2 changed the same file that B1 did, and they're not in sync anymore. What happens? Oh, I get a conflict. Okay, and so you can actually see down here, all it tells me is I'm trying to auto merge the file. I got a conflict in it and it failed. So you need to fix the conflicts and then commit the result. So now I'm going to drop in here and let's look at the file itself. So VS Code makes this nice and easy. You have this editor that understands I've done this thing, then I've gotten a merge conflict. And so it gives you some highlighting here to help you see what it is. It says, hey, current change, you have this. So this is what was in the file right now. This is in the file for B2. And then it gives me some options. I can either accept the current change, so I'm going to keep it the way it is and ignore what changed here. I'm going to accept the incoming change, so I'm going to replace what I had with what's coming in from the new file. I can accept both changes, or I can compare them. In this case, I actually want both of the changes to be accepted. Now, that could change, merge to merge, depending on what the problem is, what you're trying to solve. But in this case, I've decided to bring in both features so that they both live in the file together. So I'm going to tell it to accept both changes, and it does that. Okay, but what happens now? I've now edited the file in the middle of a merge process. This is totally okay. It's just that you have to be aware of where you are in the process. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do git commit, and I'm going to say merge resolution, because that's what I'm doing. I'm resolving the merge conflict. But this is a brand new commit that goes on top of the other two. So I had the B1 commit, I had the B2 commit, and they introduced a merge conflict, and now I'm adding another commit that resolves the merge conflict from the previous commits. Okay, and when I do that, everything clears up. That's the important thing about this. You want to make sure that you're able to resolve merge conflicts very easily. And it's all about knowing what the file is supposed to have in it. So this isn't something you can really hand off to a different developer unless they happen to be fairly intimate with the code that's being written, where they can look at it and go, oh yeah, I know exactly what we're trying to achieve here. So when you hear people argue for there should be another team responsible for releasing your code and managing all that kind of stuff and merging things together, that's not necessarily going to work for us, because generally speaking, the guy who wrote it is the one who knows how it works. And so it's best to keep all of that sort of self-contained, and then you manage it on top of that. You manage that person instead of managing the code base. I'm getting a little philosophical on you, but the idea here is that we don't want to have a separate team who's responsible for merging our code. We should be doing that as developers ourselves. So that's how you resolve a merge conflict. So you might be asking yourself, how in the world do we avoid conflict as much as possible? It turns out it's not completely inevitable. You're always going to have some level of conflict when you have two people working on the same app, but you can sort of mitigate your risk in a lot of cases. For example, we might separate the work based on modules, so that person A is working on module 1 and person B is working on module 2. And since the modules are in separate files, Git isn't going to see those as conflicting. It can still do the fast forward merge because it sees, oh, you didn't touch any of the same files that they did. I can just put all those in the same pile together and it's all good. The place where it's going to get hairy is when you start trying to make those things integrate with the app at large. You may run into places where you're having to change the same file to incorporate each other's changes. When that happens, the best thing you can do for yourself is to create small, frequent commits. The more often that you commit, the less likely you are to actually have a conflict. And the reason for this is really quite simple. The branch length, like the lifespan of the branch, if you will, is sort of the measure of the probability that something's going to be conflicting with it. If you keep this branch open for a really long time, your opportunity for someone to come in and make a change that conflicts with you keeps getting larger. On the other hand, if you create the branch, do a little bit of work, merge it in, move on, create a new branch, and keep that cycle going, you actually make things much easier in terms of merges, because there's much less chance for someone to write code at the same time that happens to touch the same things you do. We call this concept continuous integration, and we've actually covered it here on the Adventures of Blink. You can find it in the blog. I'll make sure there's a link in the description where you can go back and read that article, because continuous integration is a really important skill for a developer, particularly when you're working in a team of developers. As a lone ranger, it's not going to matter as much, but when you're part of a team, then you have to learn how to play nice within everybody's space and not cause collisions. So that's something to keep in mind. But the real secret to the whole thing is keep your commits as small as possible and as frequent as possible. Because if you're doing tons of them, you're much less likely to collide with each other. All right, so that wraps it up for this episode. We have covered a bunch of new stuff. We learned how to branch our code effectively and keep logical groupings of ideas together so that we can introduce features back into the application only when they're ready. That's a fantastic ability for any programmer, to be able to control the flow of the code so that it grows effectively and leaves us in a place where we always have a safe deployable application, and we keep adding features on as they're ready. Super cool stuff. Can't wait to dig in next week, where we're going to start looking at cloud migration stuff. So how do we use GitHub? How do we use GitLab? And how do those things help us share this repository that currently only exists on our laptop? Tune in next week so you don't miss it. Until then, I have really enjoyed the experience with you, and I can't wait to see what kind of cool things you build. We'll see you next time.